Okay, so we're at it with another video today, and we're going to be going through, this time, the typing game that we're going to be doing for Code Conquest Senior, and yeah, let's get started. So what we have here so far as our is actually the finished code from what we did in the last video, which was our bubbles and the popping. So we can still we still have all of that behavior in here. And we're gonna start the kids off with a copy of this, a completed version of this to start out for this typing game. Some of them might get upset at this because likely the day before they'll have put some work into their bubble game, right? And it might not look exactly like this, and they'll be like, oh, but like I want my colors and my bubbles, or I did this thing. Get them to start with the clean code version, just because it'll make things a little bit easier, and it really is a headache as an instructor if you have a whole bunch of different versions of the code out there right from the get-go. Because then if something goes wrong, it might be because of some other weird, random, wacky thing that they did. So just save yourself the headache, get the kids to all start with the clean code. There might be a little bit of complaining, but just tell them they can go in and re-add all of their own things again after. Typically, like once they've done it once, it doesn't take that long to go and do it again, because they can usually just like copy and paste in big sections of code, and it'll start working pretty similarly to what they had before, maybe with a little bit of an instructor or GI help. So don't worry about that, and just really get them to start with clean code. Okay. So what we will be doing today is going over how to make a typing game. And the very first thing that's going to involve is putting all of our objects here, all of our bubbles, into lists. And then we're going to show how we loop over those lists. We're going to show how we can take in keyboard input and check for keys that are typed, as well as create random characters that are supposed to be typed. We're going to show how we go over game states, like a game over, right? So if we don't type one of the characters and it reaches the bottom of the screen, we can have a game over that says that. We can do beginning use of timing, the use of milliseconds or millis in the program, and that will choose when to spawn the next letter. And finally, we can have a score and a high score for keeping track of how we're doing so far and how many characters you've typed, and actually start making a functioning game out of this. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing that we want to go over here today is how to make arrays or lists. Typically, we call them arrays in computer science, and this is what we'll be doing today. To the kids, I would just introduce them as lists because they will have heard the word list before, and it basically functions the same way, right? You have something with items on it, and you can look through each of those items. It's just a way of keeping track of a large number of things, basically. I'm going to show how we go and start adding in a list to this. So I'm going to say let bubbles equal, actually I'm going to just say let bubbles, so we're declaring our name, and then we're going to say bubbles equals an empty list, right? So this is how we actually create a list, is these two little square brackets that just lets the program know, hey, we're making a list, and right now there is nothing in it, right? And then what we're going to go do is we are going to add in what we have as our bubbles here into our list, right? So instead of saying like bubble 1 equals new bubbles, we're actually just going to say bubbles dot push, and then we can actually copy in the rest of this code here with a little minor variation, yeah. And then we can actually get rid of this line, and it's going to give us probably an error, yeah, because it doesn't know what bubble 1 is anymore. So for the time being, let's just comment this out because it's going to keep giving us errors. So you can do a multi-line comment by doing this / and then the asterisk. I give up. You can have a saying a challenge with your kids that who can say asterisk. That's how we do it. I know English. Okay, so what we're going to do here is I'm just keeping this in here with the commented out section to show the kids like how much shorter it's going to be with this new syntax. Right. So what this line here is doing is it's just adding a new bubble to the next available space in our list, to the bottom of our list, right? And we can go and do that several times over, right? So instead of having to go and like declare a name for each one as we were doing before, right? Now we can just add it into our list, and the list will keep track of everything for us, which is really, really nifty and makes it a lot easier for the kids, because by this point, especially if they were playing around with it yesterday, they probably will, lots of them will want to like add like 10 or 20 bubbles, or like basically as many as they can. And if you have this kind of like bubble1.show at bubble2, that gets old really fast because you have to retype them again and again and again. So now we're going to go over and we're going to show how we can actually go through this list and basically do the same thing that we were doing in this comment out section with a lot less code. So there are two ways of doing this. I'm going to show the easy way first, and I'm also going to show the slightly more complicated way. I would get the kids to do the easier way, and the easier way is a for each loop, which will basically just, it's code that will immediately and kind of automatically go through each element of the array, and an element is one of the bubbles in this case, right? If you watching this video are not familiar with arrays or you haven't used them before, I would recommend that you go and look that up. Maybe I'll put a couple of resources in this. If you've done comp sci before and this is all familiar to you, don't worry about that at all, but the kids definitely won't know you're talking about, so you're going to have to go through a little bit about what a list is. Don't go into the details. They don't need to understand everything about lists, but they should have like a general understanding. So what I'm doing here now is I'm going to type out my for each loop, right? And we're going to say box and index. And I know that this for each loop, it might look a little bit strange if you're used to doing this in other ways or in other languages. Boxes, it's not fun. Whoops, it's because I'm calling them bubbles. I'm copying from another tab here and I called them boxes over there. Okay, so bubbles for each, and what this is doing is, and now we basically have a for loop, right, which is going to go through each of the boxes, oh my goodness, each of the bubbles in our bubble array. And yeah, let's just write this and then it'll be obvious. So we're just going to say bubble.show, bubble.move. And actually we can already see, right, we now have all three that are working just by writing it out once, right? Cool. So now we have this code here, and these 5 lines are equivalent to like the 9 that I wrote down here earlier, right? And if the kids, if they had more than 3 bubbles, like if they had like 10 or 20, like this will start saving them time and code really, really fast, right? I'm also going to quickly go through and show kind of the more standard way of doing a loop. I don't know if I would show the kids this one, because it is a little bit more complicated and actually starts dealing with indexes and yeah, it's a little bit more complicated, but it also will give them a better understanding of loops. So what we'd hear is we'd say for let I equal 0, I is less than bubbles dot length, right, and I is plus, and then oops, I need a bracket, cool. And then in each of these, you'd say bubbles dot, bubbles I dot show, right, and then bubbles I dot move, and bubbles I dot pop bubble. And let's just auto format that. Cool, I like it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to comment out this one just to show you that these two pieces of code that I've written are actually doing the exact same thing, right? So this for loop here and this for loop here do literally the exact same thing. The reason that I would recommend the for each is that this way the kids don't actually have to worry about, like, you know, arrays start at 0 and you have to count up and access each element with its address. If you have a group of like particularly bright kids and they seem like they can handle it, totally go for this. Then they can start using for loops all over the place. If you're unsure or you think some kids might struggle, go for the for each. It's just a little bit easier because then it's a little bit more similar to what they were doing before. They don't have to worry about numbers and addresses, and they can just know that whenever they say bubble, it's referring to the current bubble that's being looked at, and it'll make sure that it goes through the entire array. So I'll re-comment out the for loop here, and I'll keep uncommented the for each loop. So those are just two quick ways that you can go through lists with them. I'd even recommend like going through some of it on the board. I'll leave that up to instructor discretion how you want to teach that, basically. But yeah, in JavaScript, probably go for the for each. Okay, so now let's start actually making this into a typing game, right? So we have now our bubbles, they're in an array. That's super cool. But we don't want them just like aimlessly going around all over the place again, and we don't want to have to do it with our mouse anymore. We want to be able to pop them with our keyboard by inputting the correct letter, right? So what we're going to need then is we are just going to change some things up about our bubble. So what I'm going to do is, for size, I'm actually always going to make it a constant size. What size do I want it to be? I want it to be 20, right? All of the bubbles will be the same size. Right? If you want, you can also go and like delete this, or you can just keep it. At this point, it becomes optional. And their speed, I also want to become 1. Cool. So now that we have these bubbles, we're actually going to start going and adding letters to them. And to do this, we're going to need, actually let's get at the bottom to keep it less confusing. We're going to say this dot letter, this dot letter, okay. And we're going to make it equal to car round random 97 122. And yet being like, okay, what the heck is this line of code doing, right? And so what this is actually doing is that there is a data type called char, or character, which is basically just all of the ASCII characters. So those are all of the characters that you see in like a standard computing screen. And in this, we're getting a subset out of that, and we're saying, okay, we just want lowercase letters, right? And in this, lowercase letters fall between 97 and 122. So each character is actually represented by a number. And if you want, you can look up like ASCII table. Right? So we can see this is what everything that we're doing, right? So once we get to, where is it here? 97, right, is when we start getting into A, and then 122 is Z, right? So we're basically, what we're doing is we're going to pick a random number between 97 and 122. We're going to round that number to the nearest integer because character only understands integers, right? Like there's no like 97.6 character, right? And then we're turning that into a character. Right? You can explain as much of that as you want to the kids, but basically this is just a line of code giving us a random lowercase character, and we're assigning it to a variable that we've now made inside of our bubble. Cool, so that's really neat. And so we have our random, but now we need to go through, and what we see here, right, is these are still popping, right, when my mouse goes over them. And that's not what I want. I now want to show, right, the letter, first of all, and then I want to pop it by typing that letter, not by having my mouse over. So first we're going to go into show, right? And basically what I'm just going to say is after we draw the ellipse, we're also just going to say text this dot letter, this dot x, and I put -2. These are kind of just little offsets that I made before, and the kids can play around with this. So this is just to try to get the letter somewhere in the, actually no, I wonder if we can look this up in the reference. Text mode, text align, that's what we want. So what I realized that I might not need the offsets here if I text align in the center, and then it should always be in the center of our circle. Okay, so if you get them to text align center, then you don't need those weird offsets because it should always be in the center, and we're just doing one letter, so it'll be great. So let's try this. Let's see what we got. Yeah, so you can see I have T, Q, and S that got randomly generated and put in there. But it looks like our fill is also weird. So let's go back and let's say fill of, let's make them black, so it's a 0. Cool. Now we can see L, D, and M. Although they look like they're not quite in the center still, hey? The Y value is a little bit off. Okay, so let's add a little bit to our Y value. Sure, that's about good. Okay, so now we have B, V, and N. Okay, cool. But my mouse is still the one that's going over them, right? So now in pop bubble, right, instead of saying if the distance to my mouse is less than the size, I kind of want to say if has been typed, right? I want to check, have I typed out this character? Right? And this one, there's a couple of different ways to do this. I'm just going to kind of do a bit of a hacky way. This isn't the best way of doing it if you have like a whole bunch of character presses, but for simplicity, this is the way that we're going to be doing it today. So instead of saying hasn't typed here, I'm going to say, okay, if key is pressed, right? So this is actually a built-in Boolean here. So this is the program. Whenever the key is pressed, whenever a key on your keyboard is pressed, then this will run, right? And then I'm going to say, okay, so if the key is pressed, if key, so the key here, once again, you can see it's highlighted in pink, that's the variable that stores the key that has most recently been pressed. Right, so I'm going to say if key equals this dot letter, right, then, right, I can say this typed equals true. What was I saying there? Oh yeah, because I changed it to prompt here. Okay, so that if the key is this letter, then I want to set this to popped. Okay. Yes, okay, let's leave it at that for now. Okay, I have some more complicated logic in my other one later, but we'll come back to that as to why. So now if I click here, and I press A, and I press Q, and I press L, is that an L? That was apparently an I that I just can't read. Okay, so you might have to go and fiddle around with the text a little bit to see it a little bit clearer, but that's okay. Because now we have bubbles which disappear when we type them. And just a thing is that after you press the play button, you have to click in the window to select it. I know it's annoying, but it's what you have to do. We'll come over with a way of solving that problem a little bit later. Actually, right now, when we do our game over. Right? So what we want to do now is we want to actually have our bubbles with our letters in them now fall down from the top of the screen. So the bubbles will be falling from the top of the screen, and we have to type them before they hit the bottom of the screen. Now, one thing that we have to do is we have to change our move function in our bubble. Now we're saying if this is not popped, then we should just change this dot y plus equals speed. Okay, there we go. So now we can see that they're all slowly going down to the bottom of the screen. We also probably want them to start near the top of the screen. So I know that up here I had them and I created them with an X and a Y coordinate and all of this stuff, right, and the size. I don't actually, let's change all of that, right? Now, yeah, you know what? Let's get rid of all of this. Let's make them completely randomly generated. Right. So the kids want, they can go back and change this later. But what we can do here is we're just going to get rid of all of these things. Right? And color, let's just make them white for now. Cool. And our X value, we're going to say is random between, let's say, 20 and width. And then our Y value is going to be random. Let's make them start off the screen a little bit. Let's say negative 50 to 0. So what they should do is, yeah, they should start just off of the screen, and they should be randomly distributed amongst the width of our screen, and they should fall down towards the bottom. Right, so I have that, and then I have LTP. Cool. So I'm typing those out now, and that's really cool, right? I'm going to change the order of this around too. I'm going to do timing next instead of game over, so we can get more that spawn. Right? And how I'm going to do that is we're going to add a timer variable, basically. So up at the top of our program here, we can have two variables. We can say let time between, and we're going to make that equal 1000. And then we're going to say let next time. So what this is doing here is we're just saying, okay, the time between basically spawns for our bubbles is going to be 1000 milliseconds or 1 second, right? And then next time is going to keep track of when 1000 seconds has passed, basically. So what we're going to do is, it might make more sense in just a second after I do this here. Because what I'm going to say is, in the setup, first of all, I'm going to say next time equals millis plus time between. so what this is doing is it's setting the next time that our bubble is going to spawn to equal the current time plus whatever time between is, which is 1,000. So it's setting it basically to be 1,000 milliseconds in the future from now, right? And what this allows us to do is basically in our draw function here, we can say, okay, if the current time, so that's millis, is greater than the next time that we were planning on making a bubble, right? Then what we can say is, oh, what am I doing here? That's why. Then we can say that we have bubbles dot push new bubble, right? New bubble is not defined. No, of course new bubble is not defined. So yeah, okay. So that's kind of fun because I didn't reset next time, so we just got a whole bunch of bubbles spawning there. What we have to say is next time equals millis plus time between. So basically we're spawning a bubble, right? And then we're going to reset the next time we spawn a bubble. So we're basically, okay, we're spawning one and then we're setting the next time that we should spawn. So here, what I should get now is one spawning every second, which is exactly what I'm getting, right? It may not look like it's every second because they are spawning a little bit randomly, but I'm seeing them approximately every 1 second here. So that means that we're good. Cool, so now we have a whole bunch of bubbles. They're falling down, right? I can type them, right? And you can see that they are getting popped as I type them, which is super, super cool. Right? There is, ooh, do we want to do this now? Yes, okay. Because what we're doing is because we're adding in a whole bunch of new bubbles here, and because we're working on Chromebooks, so we do actually have to do this right away, is we also have to make sure that we're getting rid of bubbles that have been popped already. Because if we just let them sit there, they're still going through all of the calculations, and it'll start slowing down our computer really, really fast, right? So what we can say is, right, so we have, yeah, we did it. Cool. We're going to say if bubble dot transparency is less than or equal to 0. Right? I think we can go less than or equal to 0, right? This t minus equals 5. Oh, we just called it t though, not transparency. Okay, so we're going to say bubble dot t, which is its transparency, is less than or equal to 0. Then we are going to say bubbles dot splice of index and 1. Okay, so what did I just do here? So the first thing that we were checking is bubbles.t. Now why did I check bubbles.t? Because what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, if my transparency is 0, and when my transparency is 0, that means that that fading away action is done, right? We don't want to eliminate it right as we type it, or we won't get that cool popping action, right? But if we say, okay, if we wait, and we say, okay, if the bubble's transparency is 0, that means we can't see it anymore. It's already gone through its popping animation. Then we want to do is we want to take it out of our list, right? And that's what splice does. Splice, and we can look it up too, but it'll basically remove part of your list. And I'm saying, okay, splice, starting at the index where this current bubble is, right? Starting at the index where my current bubble is, remove one bubble. So basically this is my way of saying, okay, if it's transparent, remove this bubble, right? Cool, because now I can go through and just type with reckless abandon, and I cannot see what that thing on the side was. So what I might want to do here is, instead of saying width, I might want to say width minus 20, or else you might not be able to see stuff. Okay, now we have this. We have bubbles, they're falling from the top, right? Second, we can totally type them as they come down, which is neat, right? Okay, but what happens now is we want to be able to lose the game, right? Because when the bubbles get to the bottom, then that's okay, you didn't type fast enough. We had to stop type that, but we don't want it to keep going, right? We want to stop the game when something gets to the bottom, right? And so what we're going to have to do for that is a couple of things. The first one is we're going to have to make a Boolean for game over. This is basically just going to be a way of keeping track on is the game over, right? And we're actually going to start this to equal true, because we want to start with the game kind of paused, right? And reset things in the beginning. Okay, so then what we can do is we now have our game over equals true, right? And all of this stuff here, right? Okay, so we don't need anything after the comments here. But basically, this whole thing right here, right? We only want to run if the game is actually running, right? So what we can say is if game over, right? Do something, and we'll figure out what that something is in a second. We'll say what our game over screen is. And then we're going to say, okay, otherwise, we should run the game. Right, so we're saying, okay, if the game is over, do one thing, which we haven't done yet, and then otherwise, run the game. Right? So let's just put in the game over. I have a little thing which I made here, which is just going to be press space to start. Let's make it something different. Let's make it text. I'm just gonna start saying game over. I'm gonna say press R to restart. And I realize this is gonna look maybe like a little bit funky the very first time, because you won't have started the game yet, and it'll be saying press R to restart. But it is what is going to be important. Okay. Let's leave it at that. Things, oh. PS just found the text was expecting at least 3 arguments. Yes, it was. Okay. Let's just put that 200, 200. Cool. Okay, so we have press R to restart. It's kind of just floating there. R doesn't actually restart anything yet, but we kind of have this game over thing happening here. So let's go through and let's actually make it so that we can get in and out of this game over. So inside of this, when the game is over, we should check and see, okay, are we actually pressing the R key, right? And so to do that, we're going to say, okay, and this should be kind of familiar, right? Key is pressed, right? And then we can have another statement saying if key equals R, right? And then in here, we can say, okay, game over equals false, right? So this is basically just a way of saying start the game if the R key is pressed. Running this syntax error. Why am I get? Oh, because I forgot a bracket. Cool. So when I say press R to restart, I hit R, and hey, look at that. It totally started. Ta-da! So you can see there's definitely some bugs in the system. It's not like the perfect game, but it looks like we're off on our way here to getting some. Cool. So now let's do it so that when something reaches the bottom of our screen, we can see here, right, that I actually go and restart and get a game over, right? Because currently that's not happening. But we do have our game over logic working, so we just need to check this somewhere here. So let's make a new function inside of our bubble, and we're going to say check game over. Right? And in this, we can basically just say about our y value here, right? So we can say, okay, if game over, we're going to check if this dot y is greater than or equal to the height of our canvas, then we should set game over to equal true. Cool, let's see if that worked. So R to restart. Look at that E, it's gonna get to the bottom there. Is this gonna work? No! Oh, I know what I did. Okay, that's because we made the function, but we never called it. So we need to make sure that we go back up into our for each here and say bubble dot check game. Whoops. Over. Cool. Now it's in here, press R to restart. We have a whole bunch of angry letters coming down the screen at us, and yay! Okay, so it didn't work, or like it worked and the game ended on us. Cool. So we now have a working game, but we'll notice there's one thing happening here, which is when I hit R to restart, it's just continuing the previous game state, right? And that's really not what we want. We don't want our stuff to just move only when we press R. We want to somehow reset the game when we start it, right? So I'm going to have another function here, and I'm actually just going to call it function init. So this is just short for initialize, right? And basically in it, I'm going to copy everything that I have in my setup function. Where did it go? Put it into here. Right. So basically, the really important thing is that I reset my array. Right? That's the biggest one. Because if I don't do that, that's why right now we're still getting, if we see here, we're still getting a balls or bubbles at the bottom of the screen after I do it. It's because we never reset our array. So when we initialize the game, I want to reset the array with nothing in it and then create 3 new bubbles, right? So in this, we can actually replace all of this with init now in our setup, as well as in this if key equals R. Before we actually reset game over to equal true, what we should, or game over to equal false, what we should do is init. We should initialize our new game, right? So we should have here is dun, 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 dun. Press R to restart, and hey, everything goes back up to the top of the screen. That's awesome. Now we have a refreshing game that resets its state on that. So now we actually can have a game that has a condition where you can lose, right? And this is really good for the kids because now they can actually start adding stakes into some of their games. Right? It's not just stuff moving around the screen that they can pop. Now there actually is something that you have to beat, right? Which can be really fun for them, and they can get really creative, right? So if you also tell them like you can change this to be whatever, it doesn't just have to be the balls at the bottom of the screen, right? Maybe it's like you have you can create like a life parameter, right? Like a life variable, right? And every time the ball hit the bottom, like you lose a life, or like something like that, or like maybe it's, you know, if it touches the mouse, then you lose. Actually, no, don't do that because we're going to be doing that on another day. But let the kids be creative. is what I'm getting at there. And then there's one last thing I want to do in this one, which is going to be adding a score and a high score. Right? Okay, cool. So the first thing we want to do is in our initialize, right, we want to set our score to 0. So when the game starts, our score should equal 0. Right? We also want to reset our high score, but we don't want to reset our high score every time. We just want to do that once. And if you don't have time, like if you're running short on time in the activity, you don't have to do the score here, but it is something that's cool. The kids like to keep track of score, and it's not that hard to add. So we're going to be adding it. Cool. So we have a score, we have our high score, and our high score is equal to 0, but we need to actually go and increment that score when something cool happens, right? And so what we're going to do here is, I'm going to do this one way, and it's not going to work, but it's important to show why it doesn't work. So we're going to say, okay, in my pop bubble, right, if the key is pressed, and if the key is this letter, I should pop it, right, and I should probably increment my score by 1, right? That would make sense. So I'm going to say, okay, my score plus equals 1, right, and what else do I want to do? Oh, I also want to show my score. Right, so actually, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this outside of the game over and the run, because we kind of want to show our score all the time, right? Not just when the game is running, but even if it's a game over screen, you want to see what your score was. So we want to have it there all the time, and we're going to say text. We're going to say score. Yeah, score. And then let's make it equal to 2020. And then let's also do our high score. And let's make it equal to 2040. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Cool, so now we have our 2 scores there, right? Let's make that a little bit more obvious what's happening. Let's say score plus score. Cool, with a capital, because we all know that proper punctuation is important. And then we're going to say score, high score. Cool, so now we have our score and our high score in the top left corner. You can move those around to make them more aesthetically pleasing, however you want, but I'm going to keep them like that for now. Okay, so now let's run this, and let's see what happens, because we now are showing our score, we're incrementing our score, everything should be great, right? Ah, why is my score going up by such ridiculous amounts? Right, because I actually can just like hold down the key until I delete it from the array. Because remember, we're not deleting the thing, right, until the pop animation is done. So what that means is right now, I can just hold down the key and continue getting points, right? So what we want to do is we have to find a way so that we can only ever increment the score once, the very first time that key is pressed, right? And that's actually pretty easy to do. What we can say is if this letter, so instead of repeatedly putting the score up, we're going to say, okay, when this letter is pressed, if not this dot popped, right? So only if this dot pop currently equals false, only if this is our first time popping it, right, should we set it to true, right, and score is added to by 1, right? So what this is doing is basically after the first time that the letter is pressed, this dot popped is going to equal true. So the next time we go through it, we want to check, okay, if we've already popped it, right, if we've already set pop to true, right, then we don't want to increment the score again, and we don't need to continually set this pop to equal true. So remember that this exclamation mark is the not thing, and go through. And then finally, what we can also do is we can say if this, if we say if score is greater than high score, right, then high score equals score. Cool. So now we should be pressing R to restart. And now we can see, cool, it's only going once even if I hold the letter, which is exactly what we want. And now our high score is moving up with us. Although that's weird that it shifts when it runs. I'm not going to fix that bug at the moment, but you can see that that's all working. Just one last thing I need to do is that, oh no, it actually is working. I did reset the score. I was smart. Okay. So you can see that now we have a score that's functioning, a high score that keeps track of our highest result, as well as letters that fall toward the bottom and end the game, and we can restart the game and we have a high score. There's one last thing which I'll show you which we can do, which is we can speed up how fast the letters come, right? And to do that, when we add a new bubble, we just have to set time between minus equals maybe 50 milliseconds. So now okay, in this example, I'm gonna make it 100. No, we're gonna make it 50. So every time I type something, the next bubble will spawn 50 milliseconds faster. So we can notice here is that they will become more and more frequent as, oh my god, what have I done? Alright, so something went weird there. I'm not going to worry about it right now because this video is already getting really long. You should be able to fiddle around with that and get time between working now. Alright, cool. Thanks for listening to this. This is our bubble game, and hopefully it's lots of fun in the classroom. Alright, coolio.